Yes, we are doing this video from the floor. I wanted to be on solid ground to talk about this. Admittedly, it's a rabbit hole that I've already looked down. Before the Titan even hit the news, I was thinking about doing a video on submarines just because they're cool, and then I got distracted and moved on to other things, but when I heard they'd found the debris, I still had all those tabs open, but this time with more focus on what exactly happens to the human body in deep water. This will probably be a shorter video than usual. I'm not going to give you the entire history of submarines, as interesting as it is. Instead, we're going to talk a little bit more about physics and biology. But as always, I'm not an expert, I'm just a nerd who spends too much time on the internet. Let's talk about the ocean. The deepest parts of the ocean are deadly to land dwellers for a variety of reasons. It's dark, it's freezing, there's no air to breathe, and in the very lowest parts of the ocean, even fish that are specially adapted to those kinds of conditions have a hard time surviving. The survivors of those kinds of areas are usually things like sponges. It's just an extremely hostile environment for anyone with organs. We can bring air and heat and light down with us, but one of the things we haven't been able to conquer is the very thing that probably caused the destruction of the Titan. Pressure. From the air right on the top of your head to the edge of space itself is about 1 atmosphere, which is about 14.7 pounds of pressure per square inch, or just a tiny bit over 1 kilogram per square centimeter. And the average human withstands that all day, every day, with no problem at all. But even at the lowest points of dry land on Earth, it's not usually noticeable. So humans thrive at 1 atmosphere of pressure. Air itself does have weight. Humans just don't really notice because they're completely acclimated to having 1 atmosphere of pressure on them all the time. But when it comes to pressures that humans don't do very well in, usually the culprit is oxygen. That's right, the very gas that humans breathe in to fuel their cells and keep themselves alive causes major problems when it's not in the right amounts. The only difference between medicine and poison is the dosage, and oxygen is no exception. It's the main culprit in altitude sickness, which is a condition that's usually caused by increasing your elevation too quickly and not giving your body time to acclimate to the reduced oxygen in the air around you. The CDC advises mountain climbers not to ascend more than 9,000 feet or 2,750 meters on their first day, and to keep elevation increases after that each day to no more than 1,600 feet or about 500 meters. If they do have to ascend quickly, there are medications like acetazolamide that can help reduce the symptoms of altitude sickness and relieve some of the strain on the body. Acetazolamide works by preventing the body from absorbing certain molecules, which means that the body has to flush them out in the urine. Flushing out all those molecules means that the body holds on to less water, which reduces the pressure on the organs. All that water in your body takes up space, because unlike air, liquids can't really be compressed, a fact that becomes even more important when we go underwater. Most humans naturally float on the surface of water. All that air in your lungs makes you naturally buoyant, so as long as you can keep your mouth and nose out of the water, you're probably in no immediate danger of suffocation, which is probably cold comfort for anyone who suddenly finds themselves alone in the middle of the ocean. But when you go underwater, suddenly it's not the pressure of 60,000 feet of atmosphere on you, it's the pressure of all the water above you, which isn't usually a problem at your average swimming pool, but water weighs 800 times more than air. So for every 10 meters, or about 30 feet, that you descend, another atmosphere's worth of pressure is added. For divers that swim down to even hundreds of feet below the surface, the pressure can get really dangerous. Once you go down deep enough, all that weight from the water starts to compress the air inside your body. And your lungs aren't the only organs that have air in them. Your intestines, your ears, your sinuses, even your teeth can all have air in them too. And while the water inside your body is fine because it can't be compressed, that air gets pushed smaller and smaller until your lungs are the size of fists and the air in them is no longer less dense than the water. So you just start sinking. Free divers who dive without an oxygen tank have to be really mindful of this, because once they hit that sinking point, their body will no longer just go back to the surface even if they pass out. They'll just keep sinking. Some divers bring oxygen with them in tanks to mitigate the whole not being able to breathe thing, but guess what? That can also kill you, although you'll die much faster if you try to breathe water, so personally, I would rather have an oxygen tank. You know, if I ever lose my instinct for self-preservation and decide to go in the ocean like that, divers are hardcore. But yeah, oxygen tanks can also kill you. Again, poison is just medicine at the wrong dosage. And once you start trying to breathe oxygen at too high of a concentration, it does indeed start poisoning you. At high concentrations, oxygen starts to react the wrong way with chemicals in your body and starts killing off your cells, thereby eventually killing you. But brain activity will probably cease before every single cell dies, because you'll pass out and drown, or have a seizure and drown, or become so disoriented that you remove your own safety gear and drown. Like I said, the ocean is dangerous. So needless to say, any divers who are not looking to be buried at sea on that particular trip need to be extremely careful, and usually will add other gases in with their oxygen, so when the pressure really gets building, they won't be breathing in that deadly concentration of only oxygen.
What does all this have to do with submarines?
Well, strictly submarines, not all that much. I'm getting to those. The closest I've been to a submarine is that one at Disneyland that goes like an inch under the water. Actually, I'm not even sure it goes under the water. Disneyland is kind of a fever dream. A very expensive fever dream. With excellent music. All this stuff about oxygen toxicity is for peasants who have nothing but a wetsuit between them and the vast, deadly open sea. People live on submarines for months at a time and are fine. Actually, there are problems that come with living on a submarine too, but we don't really have time to get into those right now. Maybe a future one, though, if you guys ever want to hear about the ocean again after this. Yeah, I'm getting to the submarines right now. All that pressure from the water is handled by the outside of the submarine, also called the hull. But submarines have limits too. The laws of physics generally don't make exceptions, be you human or machine. But the advantage submarines have is that they don't really have organs that start going haywire when the oxygen gets messed up. For any submarines watching this, the biggest danger to you is still the pressure. Pressure that, even if you don't need oxygen, still has the ability to crush you. And people who build submarines are very aware of this. In fact, the people who build submarines calculate how much pressure it should be able to withstand before the submarine ever hits the water. They rate it for a few different depths, actually. The design depth is the one calculated by the designers, and it's the depth that the submarine is theoretically able to withstand. It's based on the shape and thickness of the hull, the materials used to build it, and a whole bunch of other little things that can affect it. The test depth is the depth that the submarine is allowed to go to during normal operation, when everything's fine, there's no emergency, and everyone's just doing their thing. In the United States, this is usually calculated to be about 2/3 the design depth, but different countries do different things. In Germany, it's only allowed to be half the design depth. Operating depth is the depth to which the submarine is allowed to descend at any time, normal or abnormal. Even military submarines in the middle of a war are not allowed to go below operating depth, which is why some people call it the never exceed depth. And at this level, most submarines will want to go extremely slowly so they don't dip below the operating depth even a little bit. And the last rating is crush depth. Probably not hard to guess what that one means. It's the depth at which the submarine will just collapse under the weight of all the water around it. And it can tip over that edge in an instant. If you've ever seen one of the videos, or been lucky or unlucky enough to see it in real life, where a steel container just collapses in on itself from a change in temperature and therefore pressure, you probably have a pretty good idea of what it looks like when a submarine goes too deep. It doesn't break apart slowly and suspensefully in pieces, like the sunken ship it's on its way to explore did. It's just all at once. Once, when I was a kid, I was trying to boil some water on the stove, and then I went to rinse out the Pyrex measuring cup that I'd put the water in. I don't know why I felt the need to rinse out a cup that had only had water in it. I just had this weird need to rinse out any dishes I used no matter what had been in it, like some kind of irrational kitchen baptism. So I went to rinse it out, and the measuring cup that just a few moments before had held boiling water was suddenly hit with cool water from the faucet. And unbeknownst to me at the time, this sudden change in temperature, and therefore pressure, was just too much, and the measuring cup exploded right in my hands. Just shattered, without warning. 1 second it was a normal measuring cup, the next it was in 1,000 pieces. Thankfully, I wasn't hurt, just startled, and very confused, and that was the day I learned that when a rigid structure hits its limit, it usually hits it rather dramatically. It's the same with a submarine. When it hits its limit, it just implodes, and are probably ripped to pieces in the process, because oceanic pressures operate at a little bigger numbers than a kid with a measuring cup in the kitchen sink. And when the submarine implodes, mercifully, maybe, its passengers probably won't even have time to know what happened. A submarine implosion takes about 40 milliseconds, less than half the time it would take to get a pain signal to the brain. So how could this happen when the late Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate who was piloting the vessel just a few years ago, was talking about how there hasn't been an injury in the commercial sub-industry for the last 35 years, and how obscenely safe it is. Now, again, I'm no engineer, and I'm sure more information will come out as the wreck is investigated, but this is what I found out from my research. The Titan was mostly made up of carbon fibers, which is a material lighter than carbon itself, or steel, but has also not really been tested deep underwater. The hull of the Titan itself had also probably been weakened by previous voyages, and according to allegations by a former OceanGate employee, the design hadn't really been tested thoroughly, and especially not for the kind of depths that the Titan went to. There were no scans or anything to look for weak points in the hull. People mostly just took them underwater and listened for any sounds that might indicate weak points in the hull. And I didn't find any proof of this. This is just what that employee said. As I'm filming this, we don't really have any definite answers as to what went wrong, so I can't say whose fault it is, nor do I want to. The purpose of this video is education, not to point fingers. There are people whose job that is, but I'm not one of them. My purpose is just to provide information, because the better we understand the world, the better we can prevent tragedies like this. What I can say is that my heart breaks for Stockton Rush, Shahzada and Suleiman Dawood, Hamish Harding, and Paul-Henri Nargeolet, and also for their loved ones. The people on board the Titan were human beings whose lives, however painlessly, ended suddenly and tragically, and I hope those left behind who are feeling the pain and grief of losing them will have comfort and support and will be able to find peace through all of this. There is nothing that can fix this, nothing that can bring them back, but what we can do is gather as much information as we can so that we can learn from this and hopefully prevent anything like it from happening again. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night, whatever time it is for you. Stay safe, and I will see you soon.